If you were a cool and or hot person who had just come into some money in the city of Los Angeles, you would go where we're going today to probably spend that money. We're going to Crafts and Tailored today, which is the first watch company group of people that were ever nice to me and let me come in and see watches. And so when I had the money to buy my first vintage watch, I bought it from them not too long ago.
It's a slippery slope, loving vintage stuff. You start with the clothes, and eventually you wind up with the watches. And as soon as you get into the watches, you realize that you don't know shit. You are a blind baby in the wilderness, among the thistles and wolves, and you need a guardian. And my guardian, in this case, is Cameron Barr. Cameron has taught me a lot about watches. He's so knowledgeable. And today, we mostly wanted to just pick up something of sentimental value and learn a little bit more about how it was made and its history. But of course, as with every time I visit, we got sucked into the vortex of beautiful watches. And of course, by the end, I bought one. We'll get to that later.
I'm gonna give you access into the safe here. So let's
So this is how we store a lot of the pieces as we move them through like production. Obviously we have like a big social, content following and all that kind of stuff. So we talk a lot about history and stuff, but I'll just start cracking rolls. So this is roll number 1.
The funny thing about my life now is I keep being confronted with situations like this. I have the opportunity to see any famous watch, basically, that I could ever have cared about. And honestly, handling this much valuable material at one time is stressful. It's a little scary. My hands got sweaty, my face got flushed.
You're blushing a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's in the presence of greatness.
Getting a little hot in here.
You get overwhelmed. As you can see, I am overwhelmed by the sheer amount of watches that Cameron is letting me look at and try on. I personally am gravitating towards my favorites, Tudor and Rolex, mainly because those are talked about so much, and I personally want to narrow down which ones I could even see myself wearing. If he has a Rolex Explorer, that was something I was looking for. If there was a Tudor Sub around, I was looking for something like that. But despite the fact I'm looking at well over $1 million of watches, and it's making me sweaty and nervous and scared, the folks at Craft and Tailored are not snobs by any stretch, and they are a big fan of the humble pieces, of the sneaky sleeper pieces that are not so expensive. It's not all about the flash and the auctions and those crazy flex pieces. There are some humble hitters in here that are a great way to start a collection.
So this advertisement is one of the most ridiculous watch advertisements I've ever seen in my life. And basically it talks about the man's watch, which is the Seiko Pogue, as they call it. So the reason why it has the nickname Pogue is because Colonel Pogue was an astronaut, and he took this watch with him when he was on the International Space Station. It's just so cool. These watches are really high quality, and also they're kind of seemingly affordable in the vintage range.
Yeah.
Like we have watches on the table here that are $250,000. And then we also have watches that are, like less than 1,000. Sometimes like the coolness and the collectible factor doesn't translate to like the tangible price, which is one of the things that I love about vintage watches.
To someone who's maybe less immersed in this world, who wants their first vintage watch, I know like price point's a consideration, but where would you say someone should start?
Well, I think what's cool about that is even say it at like $500, there's a lot of watches that you can get for $500 that are like real deal watches.
Yeah.
Even in my collection, I have a couple of watches that are so sentimentally attached to me that aren't really that expensive, but they're just as cool as some of the watches that are on the table that are in the $500,000 mark.
All the way on the other end of the spectrum, we have the fabled Paul Newman Daytona, the style of Rolex that in 2017 set the record as the most expensive watch to ever be sold at auction at the time for a measly $17.8 million. I think in many ways, that is the watch that propelled us into this current era of watch collecting and why so many people are so rabid for watches. Now, the Paul Newman Daytona I'm looking at is not the one that was owned by Paul Newman, so it is not worth quite so much. But to see it in person, a lot of things came into focus. Cameron pointed out the so-called exotic dial on the Newman Daytona, a detail that I'm sure I had maybe noticed online, but it doesn't really stick out unless you're looking at it side by side with a traditional and less whimsical Rolex. I could have sat and talked about these watches for ages, but the real reason I came into the shop today was to pick up an incredibly sentimental travel clock that had once belonged to my great-grandfather. So around Christmas time, I was seeing my grandparents, as one does, and my grandmother, who's notorious for throwing things away or giving away heirlooms, whatever, she pulled out of a desk drawer this leather case, and she's like, "Do you want this?" And opened it, and there was this Longines clock inside. And I didn't know anything about it, it wasn't working, so when I came to buy my date chest, I brought this to Cameron and I asked him if there was any way to work on it.
Thank God your grandmother didn't give this away or put this into the Goodwill, because then a guy like me would have probably walked in there and bought it for sure. This is a Swiss-made Longines travel clock. This looks like a clock, but if you look at it from this perspective, it looks like a pocket watch. So Longines and a lot of these other watchmakers were taking kind of their known formats and then executing them differently. And what's really cool about this is we have these beautiful Breguet numerals that surround the outer portion of the dial. And you also have kind of this two-tone effect to the dial. This here is called the minute track. And then on the inside of the dial, you have kind of this like almost stepped two-tone type of like dial format. This is a power reserve indicator. So this is days. And so as you wind the watch, it tells you how many days you have left in terms of power in the watch. So you would wind this watch up and then get 8 days of power. And so when we got the watch, it wasn't working. It probably just been sitting for a while. And these things, they have what is called like a machine or a movement, right? But there's these mechanisms in the back. And the mechanism just hadn't been serviced in a long time. So all the oils had dried out, some of the components had some corrosion on them. So what we did is we disassembled the entire movement, cleaned all of the original components, and then reassembled the movement and oiled it. And now it's keeping time at basically what we would consider COSC spec, which is like plus or minus, a few seconds per day. So it's very accurate.
It looks brand new.
Basically brand new. So when we were originally inspecting this watch, one of the things that I noticed is that the watch has these cathedral style hands. And one of the reasons why the hands look like that is so a luminous material could stick in the hands. So we use this, which is ultraviolet light, and we are inspecting the dial. And as you can see, the numbers on the dial and the hands are luminous, right? So the reason why watch manufacturers use luminous paint is, say it was like low visibility or night, you could actually, this would basically glow. So in 1941, they were using this material called radium. And radium is highly radioactive. People didn't really know that back then. And radium has a radioactive isotope in it that basically energizes things that have a photoluminescence. Back in that time frame, this would have just been glowing like this all the time.
Oh, just
by itself. Okay. So you wouldn't need to use this as the energy source. This is ultraviolet light, which kind of excites those particles in there. And one of the ways that we test for radium is with a Geiger counter. So this is a little Geiger counter.
So radium, your body processes radium much like it processes calcium.
Yeah.
So if you ingest radium, it goes like calcium would into your bones. Some of these early American watch companies, they would paint with loom, and they hired these women to do the painting. And to save time and resources, they asked that the women, when they were dipping the paintbrushes in radium paint, that they would lick the paintbrush in order to like wet it and get it going. And so that was to save time and money.
Radium was considered to be this amazing thing. It was discovered in 1898 by Marie Curie, who was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize. And it was shown to have positive effects in treating cancer. So the public at large thought, oh my God, this is an amazing thing. They were putting it in cosmetics. They were making radium water. Anything that they could put radium in, they were trying to. And luckily for most people, that wasn't actually radium, because a lot more people would have died. The radium girls are painting with radium. They're ingesting radium. There's radium in the air where they're painting. It's making their hair glow, their skin glow, and it's making their dresses glow, which at the time they thought was a nice thing. They thought that was cool. There is evidence that the scientists and higher up people at these companies did in fact understand that the radium was dangerous, but that was not made aware to the radium girls. But in the early 1920s,
these women started to die in horrible ways. Radium was getting into their bones, specifically into their teeth and their jaws, because they were ingesting it orally. The companies that used radium were not taking culpability for these deaths. It wasn't until 1925 that a scientist named Harrison Martland published a study that definitively linked the deaths with radium use. Sorry that got so dark. What were we talking about? Oh, right. My great-grandfather's clock with radium on it. Okay, back to that.
And if we add this guy here, so now we're at 285. We'll probably get, yeah, that's 590. There's a lot of radium on this clock face. 626.
All right, here we go.
670. So definitely not something that you want to like keep, you know,
Yeah, in my
close to
pocket.
close to your head or in your pocket.
This is male birth control.
100%.
I really wanted something radioactive in my house, so I'm glad that I did this.
For the people out there that want to, they want to follow you everywhere, where would they do that?
So Instagram, TikTok, website, all that stuff, it's at Craft and Tailored. One of the things that we're really big on is like educating the community, and buying a watch can be kind of a scary thing.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot you have to know and look out for. So one of the things that I try to do is, you know, create content that talks about the history, but also educates people as to how to buy pieces. You know, so I would say the biggest advice that I can give is take your time and do your research.
Yeah. I think as it like relates to style, all of these watches on the table, even the ones that seem kind of formal, like they just go with everything. I feel like that's what we've learned from the Cartier insanity lately, is these were sort of dressy watches, but people are wearing them super casually and they look amazing.
I think you see a lot of that in like dressing high-low, where somebody's wearing like a really elegant, you know, set of like bespoke loafers, and then they have like these like tattered vintage jeans, and it kind of seemingly goes together. I think that that's the fun thing about watches today, is you can kind of wear something like a Cartier that was kind of more elegant and more formal, but wear it in something that's more casual, because I think there's a little bit more flexibility, you know, stylistically and culturally, that allow us to kind of experience this stuff in a different way.
Thanks again for having us in. I mean, it's just every time I'm here, it's such a treat, and
You're always welcome to come for a hang. This is the highlight of my day, just chilling, talking watches, and getting to go through the massive amounts of index in my brain.
talk about isotopes. People probably want to do that all the time.
I love talking about isotopes.
So the primary focus of our visit to Craft and Tailored was not to buy myself a watch, but guess what I did? I bought myself a watch. Cameron helped me secure something that I think is very special and very cool, and I'd love to open it up for you right now. So a lot of watch people are pretty cynical about box and papers, but I think it's pretty cool to have the experience kind of like what someone would have had when the watch was first made. So this is a vintage Tudor from 1993. The box is red. Tudor used red and Rolex used green. So there it is. There's the little brochure about the Tudor watch collection. And then the warranty, the papers. So it says Rolex all over it too, because Tudor is the baby brother brand of Rolex, and they work very closely together. And back at this point, there's a much more interconnection of the two brands. It was bought in 96, even though the watch was made in 93. And somebody cut out their name and address here, I guess, when they sold it. So we won't know where they live, unfortunately, which is sad. I'm curious though about who wore it, because you'll see. So here it is. It's velvet. And there she is. Tudor Submariner from 1993. The bracelet's a little beat up, I'll show you. That's kind of the only thing that's wrong with it. There's some dents in the bracelet. Like, whoever wore this really wore it. And that's kind of the thing about Tudors, is that Tudors have always been like the working class alternative to Rolex. Like, still nice, but more affordable. And so the people who wore Tudors really wore them. You know, it wasn't like as much of a luxury piece. So they're rarer now because they got kind of beat up. So it ends up sitting on your wrist like a much more expensive watch. Like, if you see like a really beautiful classic Rolex Submariner,
this is basically how it fits. Another thing about it is it has the Rolex hands, the Mercedes hand, the lollipop hand, these things that you see on Rolexes and Tudor does not have on its watches anymore. And I'll show you here. So even though it says Tudor on the bracelet, the crown there, you can see, that's the Rolex crown. And on the back, it says made by Rolex. Original oyster case, Rolex Geneva. The fun thing about this though, when I went to visit my friends at Tudor when I was in Geneva, and I don't think I'm allowed to share the photos, so I can't, but I saw one of these watches there, a blue Tudor Submariner. That's the reference 79090 for the nerds there. Tudor says they were the first watch company to make watches in blue, and it's just very pretty. And the other thing that's cool about it is the bracelet even is quite valuable, because in the 80s and 90s when Rolex was shifting to more modern style, these chunkier bracelets, they stopped using the thin ones and they gave them all to Tudor. And so Tudor was using these vintage Rolex parts that have become very, very valuable. So even the bracelet is sought after by collectors. And this is all stuff that Cameron has taught me. And it just has this funny, cool fusion of all these different details, and it's just gorgeous. And Cameron made this happen, and he's my guy. Craft and Tailored, they're my guys. And I just want to thank them again for inviting us in and being so generous with their time. We hope that you learned a lot. We hope that you like and subscribe. We hope that you are able to get the watches that you want coming up soon. And if you're not quite there yet, don't worry about it. You'll be there soon. It's a process, and it comes for us all in time. Bye, idiots.